God damn it!
Episode 190 of Radio Free Innsmouth, Saint Vitus, Part 2. That's right, this week we are actually going to finish the fight by covering the Wino albums of Saint Vitus' career, unlike that Forgotten Woods episode from like 2 years ago that never fucking got a Part 2. Maybe someday. If this is your first time here, Saint Vitus are one of the most important doom metal bands. Last week I did an episode about all the albums with Scott Weinrich on vocals. This week is going to be an episode about all the albums with Wino on vocals. If you don't know who Wino, aka Scott Weinrich, yes, in fact, the two famous Saint Vitus vocalists are both named Scott. That's probably why Wino goes by the name Wino, make things less confusing. If you don't know who he is, he sounds like this. You know, a much different sort of vocalist than Scott Weinrich. I like them both. Scott Weinrich, obviously, if you listened last week, you know that he hits some real wacky high notes. He's kind of all over the place. Occasionally starts doing stuff like this, you know, like grumbling out shit. Wino is more, I guess, kind of bluesy, a little bit more normal sounding, and definitely like kind of bassier. He's also notable for being about as famous as a vocalist as he is as like a guitarist and a songwriter. Because before he was in Saint Vitus, he had a band called The Obsessed, and he actually still does stuff under that name today. He also had another band called Spirit Caravan that I did an episode on a long ass time ago. He had a band called The Hidden Hand that were really good. He was in a band called Shrine Builder with some guys from Neurosis, and he even kind of does like these sort of like acoustic folk dark country blues albums as like solo projects. Interesting character. But if you're going back to the 80s, this is kind of where he made his bones. Not like that. What I mean is people know who this guy is today because he was in the band Saint Vitus, particularly on what is perhaps their biggest and most well-known album, Born Too Late, which is also sort of like the band's mission statement, and it's the album that most people, when they get into Saint Vitus, it's the first one they hear. Is it their best one? If you ask me, it is pretty much like a 10 out of 10 album, but I happen to like a couple other albums a little bit more, which I will get into later. But yeah, it's a good fucking album, and it's why Wino is around today doing so many projects. More importantly, this is still Scott Chandler.
이거는 못 고르지.
Sorry, Dave Chandler. Too many fucking Scotts in this band. It's got me all confused. It's Dave Chandler's like band, you know? He's the guitarist, he writes most of the music. So there is definitely a continuity with the Scott Weinrich albums that came before it. And it is on this album that you start to see him getting really interesting and strange with his guitar work, and that's really saying something if you've heard the first two Saint Vitus albums. This is another one of those cool kind of tribal drum beats from Armando Acosta here. But the way that the guitar is going to link into it after we get out of this noisy part is very interesting. Right around now. Using the wah pedal to turn the guitar into sort of a weird percussion instrument and like exactly linking up with the drums there. That's interesting. And then the clean guitar, or cleaner guitar, is still filthy. Also, Wino is 26 on this album, and he sounds like a crazy old like coal miner or something. And he still sounds like this today. He probably came out of the womb looking and sounding exactly like he does now. Or at least that's what I choose to believe. Really interesting sort of conversational style of vocals, like kind of an odd cadence to it. And this album is really all about doing interesting stuff with the vocals and the guitars. It's also very much a mood-based album, and it's interesting to see how the instrumentalists and the vocalists in this band modify their performances to match whatever any given song emotion is supposed to be. For instance, the song H-A-A-G, Hag, Hell Ain't a Game. Got a whole lot of different moods in it. Right now, this part is kind of lackadaisical, almost sort of happy sounding. Then you get this kind of stuff right here, which is like really fucking dark. So you got these two moods in the songs. The vocals during the happy parts match that same sort of emotional atmosphere. Maybe not really that happy, but it's definitely a little bit more uplifting sounding than your standard Saint Vitus doobie shit. And then he gets, you know, he modifies how his vocals come out for the darker parts like this. Kind of keeps that sort of descent into madness feel. The lead guitars do the same thing. They're very exuberant during the happier parts. In fact, the lead guitars are almost more sort of like a second vocalist than your sort of traditional lead guitar. And Wino and Dave Chandler do a lot of trade-offs. Then sort of just like weird staticky noises during the dark part. This transition into actual super fucking doom is really cool here. The gradual slowdown. This is like definitely actually a doom metal band. Watch this. That's that little Black Sabbath like two-finger hammer-on pull-off real quick trill thing that Tony Iommi was so good at. They incorporate that a lot. That thing. And then during the doomy parts, his vocals get much more apocalyptic and the guitars get a lot noisier. That was an example of sort of like a trade-off thing. You know, you get like the weird echoey vocal leads into the odd guitar noise. Good stuff. Lyrics on this album are really good too. Saint Vitus always has really good fucking lyrics though. Nice dark kind of outro-y section there. So yeah, that's Born Too Late. Probably, like I said, the most important Saint Vitus album. Kind of the one to start with. It's sort of like, you know, it's their Paranoid. It's their Master of Puppets, fucking whatever. So in the 80s, you kind of had like the three big doom metal bands of the time. You had Candlemass, you had Trouble, and you had Saint Vitus. And they all had slightly different approaches that made them unique. Trouble, of course, were like very fire and brimstone religious type shit.
I use my satanic powers to help people, man.
Candlemass were like very like magic and sort of fantasy, spooky based.
We're a crosswalk sign. Woohoo!
That wand out, boy.
Yeah!
Saint Vitus were more kind of everyday, sort of pragmatic tales of depression and addiction.
Smoke my fucking cigarette!
And yet, the cover of the fourth Saint Vitus album, the follow-up to Born Too Late, Mournful Cries, has a dragon on the cover, and it's got songs like Dragon Time and Troll. What's the deal with that? Well, these guys kind of take sort of fantasy metal standard tropes and use them to communicate their very like bleak kind of pragmatic view of the world. For instance, the song Dragon Time isn't so much about fighting dragons. It's more like told from the perspective of, you know, like a peasant village coming under dragon attack and kind of using that as a metaphor to talk about the more depressing aspects of life in general. That's probably the closest that Wino gets to sounding like Scott Weinrich in his entire Saint Vitus career. And I liked it a lot. Sick doom metal riff right here. And then check this out. More great Dave Chandler soloing that's sort of beautiful in its ugliness and dissonance in spite of itself. Very strange way of playing guitar. Interesting stuff. But see, he's focusing in the lyrics kind of on just like the point of view of like abject fear and horror in the face of the unknown and death, using the idea of a dragon attack to talk about that issue. More of those dank Tony Iommi trills. Nice little transition into a slightly different emotion here. Sort of a cosmic emptiness. Again, focusing on that sort of fear of mortality with the lyrics. Really like the layered guitars in this part. These solos are so weird. He actually reminds me almost of Trey Azagthoth a little bit. That might be because both Trey Azagthoth and David Chandler talk about how they're heavily influenced by Jimi Hendrix. So yeah, you take sort of like that sort of Hendrix kind of chaos working in the metal, you're going to end up with something interesting like that. Meanwhile, the song The Troll is not about the same sort of thing where it's like the troll represents death, we're scared of the troll. It's not necessarily about...
And, you know, fuck the trolls, dude. They're a bunch of assholes.
Although that might be a little bit closer to the mark as as we will see in a minute. In this case, they're taking the troll on as a persona because they see themselves as like this fucked up misanthropic being that lives underground and under bridges and eats bugs and whatnot, as sort of representing them as kind of like an outcast. But also in a way, Saint Vitus was kind of a trolly band at the time. If you read interviews with them where they talk about what it was like in the 80s, most metalheads did not like them at the time. They also played a lot of punk shows because they were signed to SST Records, which was run by the Black Flag guitarist, and the punks didn't really like them either. They were just kind of out there trolling the music industry. They didn't give a shit.
The fucking haters, they're coming for me.
And a lot of what was so great about them wasn't really discovered by other bands until like maybe the early to mid 90s. Obviously, all of sludge metal owes a pretty heavy debt to Saint Vitus, but what I found interesting is how many like much more extreme bands show clear influence from Saint Vitus. In the death metal realm, you have bands like Winter that utilized a lot of the same sort of like looming, creeping dissonance that you would hear coming out of David Chandler's guitar. Pretty much all of Funeral Doom has a lot of this sort of like weird floaty shit, a lot of which you would hear on older Saint Vitus songs like Walking Dead and whatnot. Walking Dead's actually probably my favorite Saint Vitus related thing of all time, that EP, if you're wondering. But then even in black metal, there's a decent amount of hidden and not so hidden Saint Vitus influence. This is actually Behemoth, back when they were a black metal band and back when they were actually good.
Oh shit!
I mean, you can't tell me that this isn't obviously directly inspired by Saint Vitus, in addition to Candlemass and whatnot. Countess from the Netherlands, and even some earlier, like, slower Darkthrone stuff also shows off a decent amount of Saint Vitus stuff going on in the background. But speaking of the 90s, that's where we're headed now. For an album that is tied with the Walking Dead EP for my favorite Saint Vitus release, their fifth album, V. This also might be Saint Vitus's weirdest sounding album, which is perhaps why I like it so much. I mean, sure, there's plenty of stuff on it that sounds like pretty normal Saint Vitus stuff, pretty rock and roll sounding, like this song right here, Living Backwards. Okay, that sounds like pretty normal kind of Saint Vitus style, driving mid-paced doom metal, but then you get shit like When Emotion Dies, which has female vocals, kind of some spooky narration, lead melodic bass, and acoustic guitars, combining for a very sort of psychedelic, weird effect. No drums in this one at all, pretty much. That's definitely out of the ordinary for them, and I happen to enjoy it quite a bit. And even on some of the more normal sounding songs, like perhaps my personal favorite Saint Vitus song, Ice Monkey, which, yes, is in fact a song about cocaine abuse and the Abominable Snowman. Check this shit out. This is weird. Absolute grinding wah pedal madness, and then the bass taking a much more central role in the composition, doing counterpoints to those kind of wah pedal swoops. This is a really just dark, flangered out kind of main riff for the song. Probably the darkest Saint Vitus song, either that or Walking Dead, which is my other favorite Saint Vitus song. I guess I like dark songs. They actually played this one live when I saw them, which I was highly surprised by, because it's such like a aesthetically complex song. Like, it's so weird. But then something happened after this album. This was their first album on Hellhound Records, and Hellhound Records put out a compilation of old demos of Wino's prior band, The Obsessed, which led to him reforming the band The Obsessed and then leaving Saint Vitus.
You piece of shit! Fuck you!
Hey, calm down, little guy. All that means is we get a couple of really good albums from The Obsessed, and then Wino goes on to form Spirit Caravan, who are another one of my favorite bands of all time. I actually did an episode on them a long-ass time ago, back on episode 41. And yeah, okay, I made my feelings pretty clear on the first, like, post-Wino Saint Vitus album, COD, last week. Not big on that, but, then Scott Weinrich came back and we got Die Healing, which is like one of the best Saint Vitus albums. And eventually, Saint Vitus ends up up getting back together with Wino and putting out a really interesting album called Lily F65, which apparently is the name of some fucking downer pill from the 80s that Dave Chandler was big about. And this album was pretty important for me when it came out because, surprisingly, especially for a lot of reunions albums, this album kicks ass. Die Healing was sort of a reestablishment of Saint Vitus traditional stuff. Lily F65 isn't like that at all. This one's actually like a really logical follow-up to the experimentation they had going on V. You got some really weird sort of bass-heavy drone songs, like this one, Vertigo. This one has like a really nice sort of ethereal aspect, and I know that's sort of a cliche thing to say about a lot of like metal interlude songs, but I think it fits this one really well. Got those chiming lead guitars, the weird sort of Robert Fripp style melodic drone guitar in the background, the really heavy bass guitar linking up with that super repetitive, simple kind of like bass drum beat. I thought this one was really interesting. I was glad to see them doing stuff like that again. There's also plenty of more normal sounding songs like this one, Bleeding Ground, maybe my favorite song on the album. It's got a nice spooky slow guitar riff, and then it really reintroduces Wino in an interesting way. He does that same kind of cool stuff he did in the 80s where it's like halfway between singing and talking at the same time. Very bluesy, going back and forth with the guitar like that. Lyrics on this one are also really good, as you can probably hear. And then once you get out of this sort of like bluesy back and forth section, everybody links up for more of like a descending kind of riff. I really like the emotion this guy brings with his vocals. There's a nice long note. And then watch this transition. This part fucking blew my mind when I heard it. Song completely speeds up, almost kind of goes into its own like little different thing here. Almost kind of like a little bit of a Black Flag thing going on there too. Interesting stuff, that song. And they brought back some of that weird playing around with fantasy tropes and metaphor stuff on songs like Blessed Night. This is their first album with their new drummer Henry Vasquez instead of Armando Acosta. And he has a much different style. It's kind of more hard rock and punk rock than the weird tribal stuff Acosta did. This is like a pretty cool kind of fast song. I like when they do fast songs. Some of my favorite Saint Vitus songs are the really fast ones. I don't know why. Are they supposed to be a doom metal band? I don't fucking know. Lyrics are really cool. Watch this part. This part's sick. That's so badass. That's like Saint Vitus Man-O-War shit. And yeah, obviously the leads are great. The leads are always great. That's been like a main selling point of Saint Vitus for me ever since I first heard them. But then yeah, after that, history repeated itself, and Wino got too busy with the Obsessed in Spirit caravan again. They got Scott Regers back. We covered the most recent Saint Vitus album with Scott Regers on it last week, and yeah, of course that one kicks ass too. Pretty much all Saint Vitus kicks ass. Go and listen to it. Thanks for listening, or watching, or whatever you fucking did.
It's annoying. Fucking fart noise. I fucking hate it. We're talking. Fucking give me your fucking hatred. Please do it. I've been fucking, like, give it. I love your fucking hatred. Fucking like, like some like, I don't know, like